Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. So imagine you only have $10, not too much in the refrigerator, and you still need to make your full day of meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for a family of four. I'm going to show you how to make three very basic, cheap, quick, but delicious meals that are absolutely filling and can actually serve for more than four people. So let's start off with breakfast. Okay, guys. Super simple breakfast. Your two main ingredients that you're going to need, if you, Lord forbid you don't have anything on hand, is two eggs and two potatoes, any size. So I've soaked my potatoes in some salted water in order to take out some of the starch. And from there, I'm going to heat up a pan. Now, if you don't have a cast iron skillet, don't worry, use whatever you want. I put oil in there. You don't have to use butter, but I like to add a little bit of butter if I have it in the refrigerator, just to add a little flavor to my pan. From there, I'm going to go ahead and season my potatoes. I'm using Cajun seasoning, but if you only have salt and pepper, use that. I'm going to show you how to jazz it up though. From there, of course, we have some Italian seasoning. And if you have parsley, you can use that. If you have whatever in your shelf, garlic powder, onion powder, throw all of that in there. I'm going to be pulling what I have, and you know I keep complete seasoning on hand. So that right there is my staple. I'm going to also be adding some paprika, but this is mainly for color, as we know that paprika doesn't really do anything other than add color, y'all. Let's be for real. And from there, I'm just going to make sure that everything is coated with that oil because potatoes do tend to stick. Make sure you dry your potatoes before you throw them inside this hot oil because we don't want any surprises. So like I said, all I'm going to do is make sure that my potatoes are coated with that oil, and I'm going to leave them there to cook. Now, off to the side, I'm going to be making some eggs. I like to do this in listen, this is my cheat sheet. I like to use a non-stick pan. I have a little one that I use for little egg things that I like to make for like sandwiches or whatever. I don't even know what to call them. It's a cheat sheet. It's a little tiny egg pan, but that's what I'm going to be using here. I'm just going to make some scrambled eggs. If you have eggs in the refrigerator, freezer, whatever, you want to grab those out. I have two other eggs on the side, so you're going to see what I'm going to do with those. Here, I'm using those two eggs, but I'm going to add more eggs because, like I said, I'm cooking for a family of four. And as I realized, I actually have more potatoes than eggs because those potatoes were bigger than I thought they were. You don't have to do more than two eggs. This is just what I chose to do. And all I'm going to do is just do a quick scramble. And because I'm going to be adding them to the potatoes, they don't have to be fully scrambled, but I want to go ahead and scramble. My family tends to like scrambled eggs that are like scrambled really hard. And let me just also note, if you guys notice that there's more food around that is cooking, just know that I batch cook in the morning in order to save time, especially on a Saturday or a Sunday. So I'm going to be making breakfast, lunch, and dinner all in one whop. This takes me about an hour to an hour and a half to prep everything, and I'm done cooking for the day. And I'll teach you some tricks on how to make sure that everything's still pretty fresh so everybody can heat up the food later on and you can be doing whatever else it is you're doing. So here, I'm just over here, spinning around. Actually, no, I'm over here making sure that my potatoes are not burning because I am cooking a couple things on the side. I want to make sure that my potatoes are cooked, but I also don't want them to burn. So I lowered the heat. If you have onions in the refrigerator, if you have bell peppers, any type of veggies, you can add it here. I happen to still have some frozen veggies. As you know, I keep those frozen veggies on hand because I don't have time to cut onions and peppers and all those things. And it's cheaper actually to buy the seasoning mix. So all I'm going to do is make sure that everything's coated, and I'm going to allow that to cook down. And that's also going to add another level of seasoning for these potatoes. So I'm going to leave that for a couple of minutes. I'm going to go off to do whatever else I was doing. And then I'm going to come back, right? So here I'm giving it another spin. I want to say that the potatoes take roughly about 15 to 20 minutes to cook because I have soaked them in that salt water. I don't remember what my parents told me about the salt water, but I know that if I put my potatoes in salt water, they don't take as long to cook, and they don't turn brown, they don't oxidize, right? So here's my potatoes, and they're pretty much almost done. So to my potatoes, I'm going to go ahead and add the eggs, and you'll see what I'm going to do a little bit later on because I noticed that these eggs weren't enough for these potatoes, and specifically for the video and for my family. I said, you know, let me add a little bit more eggs here because this is breakfast for them. And I just put it off to the side so that they can eat it. If they want to put cheese to it or anything else, they can do that. But it looked a little skimpy to me for my family. But if you only have a couple of dollars, listen, you do not have to do anything extra. This is just me being extra and having the extra 2 eggs on hand. And I really don't like to just have 2 eggs in a container because my kids tend to skip that container and move to the new container. So, so here you're gonna see me just add the eggs that I went ahead and beat off to the side. And this was 2 additional eggs, like I said. And I'm just gonna put them in the pan and I'm gonna let them cook in the pan. You could have done this from the very beginning. You didn't have to use 2 different pans. This could have been a 1 pan meal, but look, I'm extra. And like I said, my family does prefer to have the eggs cooked quite well. So I like to make sure they're cooked off to the side. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just spinning around in my pan, you know, making sure that everything's cooked. And this will be a perfect time if you have any extra hot dogs, any proteins, any type of meats that you have in the refrigerator. I happen to have ham off to the side because we buy our ham in like the big roll, and I just used an electric cutter or a knife and cut it. But I needed to get rid of some of the ham. So I'm going to add the ham to a couple of these recipes throughout the day. So the first recipe that I'm going to add it to is this right here. And you can either cook it off to the side or you can just go ahead and add it to this. I went ahead and added it because it is pre-cooked ham. It's actually that sandwich meat ham, and it didn't really need to cook, but I wanted it to, you know, blend well with the potatoes, right? Now, if you don't have any protein, that's just fine. You do not have to add this to the meal. And if you're vegan or vegetarian, you do not have to add the butter. You don't have to add the eggs. You can use that no egg substitute. So there's different ways you can do this. And I'm just showing you cheese. My family doesn't necessarily want me to put the cheese inside here. So I don't, but I like to add it to my plate. But here I'm just showing you what it looks like once everything's cooked. To me, it's very important to have color to your food. So you can add more bell peppers, more, I don't know, more paprika, whatever. I just like to make sure that there's a contrast of colors. And that's why you'll see that the ham, then you have a little bit of red peppers and stuff inside most of my foods in order to just make it interesting. Just because you're being frugal does not mean that your food has to look like it's super cheap. But yeah, that's it. That's just how quick this meal is. Now I'm gonna jazz it up for YouTube and for, you know, the first clip that y'all saw. You don't have to add any of this. This is just me being YouTube ready, y'all. So here I'm just adding some parsley. I like to add a little bit of cayenne or chili powder, but this was cayenne that I added. You can add paprika. I mean, if you're not doing YouTube videos, girl, you could have just ate it, right? But this is just me being extra. So I'm going to add some cheese to mine because I prefer cheese. Everybody in my household does not eat cheese like this. For some reason, you could put cheese on pizza, you could put cheese in macaroni and cheese, but they don't necessarily like melted cheese on their food. So if you're like that, tell me what that's about. I don't understand it, but yeah, that's how they are. And look, I'm not here to fight. I just want to make sure that everybody gets a complete meal. So yeah, this is breakfast. So now let's move on to lunch. Okay, so for lunch, this is going to be super, super simple. And all I'm going to do is here I have a pot of water. I'm going to add some elbow pasta to it. Of course, I'm going to add some salt. You could use chicken stock if you have it. I don't have any, so I'm just going to be using salt. And to my pot, I'm going to add the elbow macaroni after I add the salt. Most of my measurements for seasonings is to taste because my taste is not the same as your taste. So I can't tell you put 1 tablespoon or two. I don't know if you have sodium issues. I don't know if you have high blood pressure. So I'm just going to tell you stick to what you typically use as far as salt. To this, I'm going to be adding some frozen vegetables. If you have canned vegetables, you can add it at the end, but because I'm using frozen vegetables and frozen vegetables do not get mushy, I go ahead and add it at the very beginning. And I just cook everything at one time because we're all about cheap, quick meals here, right? So one and done. So I'm going to go ahead and cook that according to the package that the elbow macaroni told me to cook it. Nothing special, nothing super unique. I'm just going to give it a quick stir and I'm going to leave it. And then I'm going to come back once it's cooked. I'm going to drain off the water like I typically do with pasta. I'm going to leave some pasta water off to the side. And here I'm going to be cooking some of that ham that I told you guys about because I needed to get rid of it. You do not have to do this, but I'm doing this just to give you some ideas on how to jazz up a meal. If you have anything in your refrigerator that you need to use, or maybe it's old chicken, I don't know, whatever protein, maybe you have tuna, maybe you have canned chicken. A lot of times people get canned chicken in pantries, food pantries. They don't necessarily know what to do with that. This here is a way to add a little bit of protein if you need to. But like I said, you don't have to. So all I'm doing here is I'm browning the ham. And my ham is going to get real brown, y'all. Because it's like a maple ham and I forgot and I left it off to the side. And like I said, I was cooking like 15 other things at the same time because I like to batch cook. I'm very time sensitive. I'm very much on a schedule. So I tend to batch cook in the morning because I have tons of other things that I need to do. So this helps me to make sure that my family eats a meal. And at the same time, I can do what I need to do. So here is the pasta and the veggies all cooked. And as you can see, I've drained off most of the liquid. Now to that, I'm going to be adding 2 slices of sliced American cheese. Any cheese you have will do fine. If you have a cheese sauce, you can go ahead and add that. You can add whatever you want here. The whole point is to make it cheesy. Now, if you don't eat um, dairy, you can use nutritional yeast. I'm going to be using the American cheese. I'm going to be adding a little bit of the Fiesta cheese. You can add cheddar, whatever you like, you can add. I'm adding what I happen to have, but I like to use American cheese with the Fiesta cheese. I just think it makes it taste more, fancy. And to that, of course, I added my complete seasoning. And here I'm showing you, you can either use the pasta water or milk. You do not have to go out and buy milk for this. I have milk that I need to use up, so I'm going to be using milk. You can use the pasta water and the milk. I chose to use milk. So you're just going to stir everything up, make sure everything's melted. If you have some butter, you can add butter here. And at the same time, because I'm going to have this for my kids and my husband and stuff for later, I would go ahead and have the pasta water off to the side and still add it to stretch it to make sure that when it heats up later on, it's not dry. Or if you're the one that's going to heat it up for later, you can keep the pasta water off to the side. And when you get ready to heat it up on the stove or in the microwave, you can add the pasta water back. And that just depends on how much pasta water you want to add. So this is me adding a little paprika because I felt like it was a little less yellow than I would like. So paprika, like I said, is just to add a little bit of color. Some people swear it has a taste. Now, if it's smoked paprika, yes, let's be honest. Regular paprika really doesn't have a flavor. It's more for color than anything else. So here, I'm just going to plate up a bowl just to show you what it looks like. I'm actually going to be eating this, so you're going to see what I'm going to do a little bit later on. But I wanted to show you the basics of this meal and what it looks like. Just plated just, to eat as is. And like I said, the very basic recipe will be down in the description and all the price breakdowns and everything as well. So if you didn't add anything else, this is what your meal will look like. But what I told y'all, I'm extra. So here's me adding a little more paprika, a little parsley, and I'm going to be adding back that ham too in a little bit. But yeah, this is what this looks like for, just the YouTube clip, just to let y'all know that a lot of times when we make videos, it's just to make something pretty. It's not necessarily practical. So you don't have to have all the fanciness because I would have ate my food without the paprika or the parsley because there's no flavor there. But here I'm adding that ham there. And like I said, any meat that you have, you could just add it here. If you have bacon bits, you can do that. But this ham acts just like bacon. So I just add as much as I could, honey. So this is my plate and this is what it looks like when it's all done. Very colorful, very delicious, very cheap too. Simple and easy. Now let's move on to dinner, you guys. Okay, so for dinner, our main ingredient here is some ground turkey. And the reason why I use ground turkey is because it's cheaper than ground beef. Right now, it's about $2. So I'm going to be using canned red beans, canned black beans, and some canned tomatoes. These are things that I keep staple in my shelf. If you don't have those, you can use either or neither. And you could also use a packet of chili powder, or I'm sorry, of that chili seasoning, but I'm going to be using paprika, chili powder, some ground cumin, complete seasoning, some adobo seasoning to get that chili flavor. So whichever way is cheaper for you, whatever you have on hand, you go ahead and use that. But if you don't have either one of those things, just go ahead and pick up the chili seasoning packet. So to my pan, I'm adding some oil. And this ground turkey, because it is turkey, even if it was ground chicken, it's going to produce a lot of water. So I'm going to show you how I deal with that. So here to my pan, I'm going to just add my ground turkey. And I'm going to only use the 1 pound of ground turkey because remember, we're trying to stretch our dollar, right? So I'm going to be seasoning the meat. And I think that this is the key to having a delicious meal. Just because it's ground turkey don't mean it gotta be nasty, y'all. My family doesn't ever know. Well, they probably know the difference and just don't mention it. But when I finally do add the ground meat here, I'm going to be seasoning it. And what I will tell you is I'm going to be using my crock pot. You do not have to use a crock pot. You can use a pot on your stove and just put it off to the side and let it cook for a while. But because I only have a limited amount of time and I do happen to have a crock pot, I'm going to be using my crock pot. But like I said, if you have a pot, you can go ahead and just slow cook this on the stove for about 2 to 3 hours just so that the flavors can, mesh together. So here I'm just making sure that I smash that meat out really, really good. And I'm going to go ahead and season the meat like I said. So I'm adding the adobo seasoning. You can use salt. You don't have to use the fancy seasonings. Some complete seasoning. I'm going to add some Italian seasoning. You can add parsley. Excuse me, and also some cumin. And I'm going to be adding the chili powder. And I am going to be adding garlic as well. I love garlic, so I'm going to put a lot of garlic in here. If you have garlic powder, you can use that. If you have fresh garlic, you can use that. You don't have any garlic, you don't have to use it. And if you did not have any of the seasonings that I had, you could easily just use a little bit of that chili powder seasoning and a little bit of salt. Be careful with the salt if you're going to slow cook anything, whether it be in a crock pot, on a pot, on the stove, because for some reason, when you slow cook foods, they tend to absorb more salt and they tend to get very salty at the end. So limit the amount of salt you're going to use if you're going to slow cook this. So as you can see, it's producing quite a bit of water. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to let the water cook down and produce. Listen, it's just gonna get real flavorful. I'm gonna allow that meat to soak up the fluid that's inside the pot. Some people like to pour it off. I don't. I let it sit and cook down. And if it browns, that's a plus. If it doesn't, that's okay. So that's just me mixing around everything. I keep coming back to it just to make sure everything's still cooking, not burning, and just working the way I need it to. So here, as you can see, the liquid has gone down and I'm just stirring everything to make sure that we're good to go, right? So you're just going to push that off to the side. You're going to either get your pot or your slow cooker, and then we're going to move on to the next step. But I'm just showing you what happened to the liquid. I didn't pour any of the liquid off. I allowed the meat to go ahead and absorb all that flavor, right? So here's my crock pot, right? My trusted crock pot. No talk about my crock pot, y'all. Yes, I have something under it because it's lost one of its legs. So to that, I added about a cup of water. I rinsed off my kidney beans and I added the kidney beans. I rinsed off my black beans, added my black beans. And you don't have to rinse it, but I don't like that slimy feeling on the beans, so I just use those. And then to that, I'm going to go ahead and add my tomatoes, but it was still some tomato juice at the bottom, and I wanted that too. So I just rinsed out my can with some water, and here is where you would have added the rest of your chili seasoning if you were using that. I'm not using that. I'm going to go ahead and use the seasonings I have. So I'm going to be adding onion powder, some garlic powder, some cumin, and like I said, this is to taste. You know what you like. And everything really, I would say about 1 teaspoon, 1 to 2 teaspoons. So there I added my chili powder. I add a little bit of paprika because I want to make sure it has that deep red color. And we're not adding a lot of anything in there. And, the beans will help it to get dark red. I want to make sure it look like chili, y'all. So I believe that was onion powder that I added, but none of these are salted. So you can add as much as you want of the seasonings that are not salted. You can add Creole seasoning, Cajun seasoning if you want to. I'm not going to do that. I, of course, add complete seasoning. Listen, if you do not use complete seasoning, that's your business. I can't force you to use it, but I like it, right? So there I'm adding adobo. You do not have to use adobo. If you have salt, please use salt. I just prefer to use a seasoning mix versus just a plain salt. So here I believe I'm adding Italian seasoning. If not, it's probably parsley. My basics, if you watch my videos, I don't stray away from too many seasonings. And my secret ingredient with this, guys, is a little bit of ketchup, just to cut all the savory flavors and to give it just another dimension of flavor. You can add as much or as little ketchup if you want to. You don't even have to add the ketchup. If you don't have ketchup, don't use it. If you have about 2 packets, use those. So I also went and rinsed out my pot because I want to get all the flavors from the ground turkey. And I just poured that in there. So those liquids that I added are going to help everything to melt together. And yes, it looks a little bland and not so appetizing right now, but trust me, after about 2 hours, you're going to get something super, super delicious. So I'm just going to push my crock pot off to the side, finish up whatever I had going on, and I'm going to come back about 3 hours later. And look, y'all, this is what we have. Everything looks super delicious. Everything's super savory. It tastes so good. My camera started to fog up, so I had to get a little bit closer, but look at that. Super delicious. Now, if you had onions or any veggies, you could have added that. I didn't have any, so I didn't add it. I used my last bit of veggies on that hash meal. So look, you use what you have. It's for your family. They don't care about the onions. If you love onions, you go buy onions, but I didn't have onions. So basically, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to plate this. Now, this is great, especially with fall coming up, even though it's still hot here in Florida. I would eat this with some cornbread or some rice. We do have rice that we keep in the refrigerator. We're a rice family, so I keep rice. So I would probably eat this with rice. I haven't ate it yet because I'm actually filming this, not filming, but actually editing this video the same day that I'm making this meal. So I will be eating this later on this evening for dinner. But I did take a little taste, y'all. Y'all gonna see at the end, I did take a little taste and I did give my husband a plate. And he said it was good. I know it's good because this is something that I use as my go-to if we're doing something really quick, really hearty, something really delicious. And this serves actually more than 4. But yeah, guys, as always, thank you for watching. I appreciate you. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and until the next video, guys, bye.